Good morning, everybody. My name is Shelley Roth, and I'm here to present Gender Non-Binary 101, shedding light on the gender spectrum, and also talking about why gender-neutral language matters. Now, this session is recorded. If you're listening after the fact, welcome. If you're here live, welcome. You will also be able to access the slides. You'll notice there'll be embedded links for watching videos, and there is a resource section that you can access when you receive the slides. So we're going to get started. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on me. Most people around Houston and some other cities I've presented in know me as a social media trainer, navigator, speaker. Believe it or not, been doing that for 13 years, a very long time. Also a constant contact solution provider. If you're familiar with constant contact email marketing, I have been using that to market my business, and now this new gender spectrum training, I have a newsletter as well, which I'll talk about coming up. I added gender non-binary training and consulting in 2017 when I published my fourth book, Don't Call Me Ma'am. And I want you to know that all profits from my book sales and my training go to an organization. Their website is glbthomeless.org, Association for Family and Community Integrity. They do some great work in educating and also helping GLBT homeless youth. And I encourage you to go check my book out, Don't Call Me Ma'am. It is on Amazon, and it is my story about coming out as trans and how that all unfolded. Now, the easiest way to find me is at shelleyroth.com. Hold on one second, please. And if you go to shelleyroth.com, you will see all of these icons. You can check out my social media pages. You also can go to my events page. And we'll talk about my diversity group, my very private group on Facebook, as well as my newsletter that you may want to sign up for to learn more about what's in the news around the topic transgender, gender diversity, gender spectrum, gender non-binary. So that's the easiest way to find me, is at Shelley with an EY, Roth.com. Now, the mission of Springboard, my company, parallels the mission of the Center for Global Inclusion, who I was introduced to back in 2017 and was authorized by them, and with their permission, out there doing some of the work that they do. And their mission, of course, as well as mine, is to create a better world. It's as simple as that, but sometimes it can be difficult. But basically being respectful for everybody, for all individuals with their similarities and differences. And of course, to help organizations with their communication and performance by sustaining an environment that treats everybody fairly. I added part of my mission, of course, is to raise money and awareness for LGBT homeless youth through the glbthomeless.org and the AFCI nonprofit that I mentioned. I send all my dollars to, not just net, but gross profit dollars all go to them on all the work that I do. Now, today we are going to talk about definitions, understand more of what does it mean to be on the gender spectrum or gender non-binary. I'll share with you my story and gender neutral language, policy suggestions for your company or organization, becoming an ally. We'll take Q&A throughout the presentation as well as at the end. And there is a resources section, as I mentioned, that you will have access to when you get the slides as well as the recording. So let's start with some basic definitions. And before we jump in, we'll see that gender's journey started back in 2007. Newsweek's cover looked like this. And on the front headline, The Mystery of Gender. So we're talking about 12, 13 years ago. they started questioning, what is gender anyway? Is it more than our physical attributes? History and science suggest that gender identity is more complicated than biology or biological birth sex. Gender identification is separate from our sexual orientation and different from our biological birth identity, which we're going to cover all this as we go through. And then, of course, in the United States, gender historically has been male or female based on what we see biologically. Fast forward to 2017, National Geographic not only had a cover, Gender Revolution, the whole issue was devoted to gender, and Katie Couric even did a TV special on it. It really is a deep dive into what gender is, and if you haven't seen this issue, even though it's older, I'm sure you can find it out there. It really is pretty amazing. We've come a long way, and of course we still have a very long way to go, as that would attest to. I published this webinar on my Springboard social media Facebook business page and had a lot of, I don't want to say haters, that might be too strong. There's just so much misunderstanding about this topic of gender and how it differs from biological sex. So I'm out here doing this work, and a lot more needs to be done. The definition of gender: whereas sex, male or female, which is what we're stamped, if you will, when we're born, is a term to classify people biologically based on physical anatomy, etc. Gender is the social meanings and obligations by oneself or society. I like the simple statement, the state of being male or female, typically used with reference to societal and cultural differences rather than biological ones. Now, sex, biological sex, is something that's assigned at birth based on the anatomy, and in most cases it is male or female unless you are intersexed, which we don't have this as part of our discussion today, but we're speaking in generalities. You are either born with female genitalia or male genitalia. Gender identity is assumed and assigned at birth based on the baby's sex. Again, it's just an assumption. There's not two boxes to check at the time. There's just one. What is the baby's sex, male or female? However, a person's gender identity may not always match their biological sex, their assigned biological sex. Gender identity may be on a spectrum. You'll hear other terms like gender expansive, gender non-binary, transgender. So sometimes gender identity is just not as clear as to male or female or binary. Sexual orientation is another category. This is basically your sexual preference, typically confirmed in adolescence. And gender expression is the fourth category we'll review today, and it's how you present yourself. Now, if we look at the basic category where your biological sex matches your gender identity, the term for this is cisgender or binary. So if a female, born a female, gender identity woman, they would be considered a cisgender woman. If a male, born biologically a male, gender identity man, they would be a cisgender male. So that is what a cisgender is. You'll hear that term. That basically means your gender matches the biology you were born with. You are cisgender. Now, your gender expression and how you present yourself, like in this case, wearing a pink dress and everything frilly, your gender expression would be feminine. And on the male side of the house, the same thing. Your gender expression could be masculine. But gender expression can be across a spectrum as well. With gender being on a spectrum, meaning gender fluid or gender non-binary, just not two, we're born biologically male or female, but are with male or female anatomy, but gender is a spectrum. And some days your gender identity could be more male, more female. It could be fluid, not one or the other. And that's what's happening out there in the world right now. Most millennials do not want to be defined as gender binary, as one or the other, as male or female. A recent survey of 1,000 millennials found that half of them think gender is on a spectrum. It's just not as simple as black and white, male and female. And you can see who makes up the largest segment of our population are millennials, almost 87 million population. So they're the ones that are kind of going to be driving a lot of what's happening. Now, gender spectrum, gender is usually not established by the child until they're 3 or 4 and become aware of their body parts and start questioning what they're feeling. A cisgender person identifies their gender with the biological sex assigned at birth. Transgender people like myself do not. I totally identify outside of my birth sex. My birth sex is female, but my gender identity is male. Now, those that are gender expansive, gender non-conforming, gender non-binary can be across the spectrum and aren't one or the other. They can be very fluid. And I like this definition of what does it mean to be non-binary. And according to the National Center for Transgender Equality, non-binary and genderqueer identity are labels that refer to people who don't identify with any specific gender or whose gender changes over time. The word non-binary literally means someone whose gender falls outside of the male or female binary. And this, you'll see clickable links throughout the presentation you can click on when you get the slides to learn more. Now, gender expression to me is probably the easiest of all. It's just basically how you present yourself. Whether you present yourself, your hair, your mannerisms, your speech, your dress, gender expression can be on a spectrum as well. A cisgender woman may be going to a, bird watching, and they may wear more male or masculine looking clothing. So their gender expression could be on a spectrum. It doesn't always have to be feminine, if you will. This is a screenshot from a movie called 3 Generations with Elle Fanning. And I would say that in this particular movie, she plays a transgender male, and her gender expression, as we're discussing, is masculine. Again, gender expression can be across a spectrum. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Now, using a toy manufacturer, Mattel's Barbie and Ken dolls, we're just going to say that Barbie and Ken, we'd probably all agree that biologically their birthday suit, their anatomy is male and female, and then of course their gender identity, we're going to again just make some assumptions. They're on the binary. Ken is male and Barbie is female. So we would say that they are cisgender versus either of them being on the gender spectrum or non-binary or gender fluid or gender expansive or transgender. Their sexual orientation, again, making some assumptions, I would probably say they're heterosexual, not gay or lesbian, not bisexual, not asexual. And their gender expression, well, we'd say that looking everything up from the shoes on Ken, the gender expression, hair and clothing and physical is masculine for Ken and feminine for Barbie, although those shoes on Ken might be on the gender spectrum a bit. Now, myself as a transgender person, the definition of a transgender person describes people whose gender identity differs from the biological sex assigned at birth. So I was born biologically a female, but my gender identity is male. Now, Laverne Cox, who you may have heard of, pretty popular person out there, born biologically a male and gender identity is female. But I want to be very, very, very clear that some transgender folks choose to have gender affirmation surgery, as Laverne Cox did, as I have not. The definition of being transgender is not related to having affirmation surgery and taking hormones. I want to be very, very clear on that. Surgery is risky. Surgery is dangerous. Surgery is painful. I've had enough surgeries. I have not had a gender affirmation surgery, just a choice that I make. And those that do, good for them. And those that don't, it doesn't make them any less of a transgender person. If you're not familiar with Asia Kate Dillon, they are an actor on Billions and in the movie John Wick. I absolutely love what they say in this quote, because this is exactly what I have felt since I first discovered I was transgender. And I'm going to read this because I think it's important. We all have an assigned sex. A gender identity is placed on top of that. I don't need to change my body in order to be valid as a non-binary or as a trans person. So love that, agree with that. And you also notice that Asia Kate Dillon has an honorarium, MX, pronounced mix Asia Kate Dillon. And MX, mix, has been added to the Oxford English Dictionary. So we now have an honorarium that is gender neutral. I wanted to share with you how Asia Kate Dillon on Twitter, you can see MX, Asia Kate Dillon, and they, them, theirs, pronouns under their name, as in, quote, there they go with their bad self, I love them, unquote. And we're going to talk more about pronouns and they as a singular pronoun coming up. Now, there are many cultures, including Native Americans, that have a third gender. Their cultural norms have a third gender. In the Native Americans, it's two spirits. And there's gender fluidity, non-binary, gender expansive, keeping in mind that this means people whose gender identity does not match the binary, male or female. Many cultures recognize more than two genders. The Samoa have a third gender called Fa'afin, a gender other than boy or girl. South Asia, Nigeria, and you'll notice I'm not attempting to pronounce these, Mexico, Thailand, Tonga, and even in the United States, Hawaii, the Mahu people have a third gender. So this is not something that's all of a sudden happening. This has been going on for a very long time, that there are more than two genders. Now, in the United States, we've seen a lot of mainstream exposure. We've seen Laverne Cox, of course, in the series Orange is the New Black. Just recently, the first transgender person to be on the cover of Vogue. This was the cover of Vogue Britain. Caitlyn Jenner, I'm sure most people know that name, was an Olympia decathlon gold medalist, transgender woman. Transparent series is really good Emmy award-winning series on the Amazon Prime channel, as well as a new series on FX called Pose, where most of the actors are transgender, which is really encouraging and exciting to see. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Asia Kate Dillon is on Billions and plays a non-binary role. National Geographic came out with that issue we mentioned, Gender Revolution, in 2017, and if you still can find the Katie Couric special on demand, it's on the Nat Geo channel. So lots of mainstream exposure for this topic. The question came out on the special that Katie Couric did, could gender be biological? So scientists are starting to look into the possibility that something happens in the womb that impacts gender identity. Maybe something in the point of development, signals gets mixed and the brain gets one set of instructions and the anatomy gets another. There's one thing I'm sure we'd all agree upon, that if there's ever a conflict in the anatomy and the brain will win every time. So this is a screenshot from the 2020 special. And you can see the baby is in utero and the signals to the brain are blue or male, and the signals to the biology are female. So interesting concept. It'll be interesting to see what's uncovered over the next decade. We are going to do a little exercise. I want everybody to take out a pen and paper, and I want you to draw something very similar, or write your address, or write down your favorite food. Just something, take a few seconds to do this. And in the meantime, I'm going to check to see if we have any questions coming in from anybody. Looks like we're good. Now, I want you to do the same exact thing with your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, I want you to do the same drawing or write the same thing with your left hand. And if you're left-handed, I want you to do the same thing with your right hand. It will take a few minutes for that. Okay. I want you to, in the chat section, describe how it felt to try and draw with your non-dominant hand and describe the resulting picture of text. So righties, what did it feel like to draw right with that left hand? And lefties, what did it feel like to draw or write with that right hand? Let's go ahead and see what we have. What words describe words or phrases. So some of the words that came out were difficult, unnatural, unbalanced, funny, strange, awkward. See, awkward is spelled wrong. I'm going to read you something from Hannah Simpson, who is an associate of mine. She's also a transgender woman. And she says, and I quote, "I compare being transgender to handedness. How do you know you're right-handed or left-handed? No one tells you. You're not born with a mark on your hand telling people what you are. You just know. When you put something in the wrong hand, you know it feels wrong, doesn't feel right." She continues to say that's how gender is. When a trans person's walking around the world in the gender they're not, they know it feels wrong. They just know. And when they live authentically, it's like picking up a pencil in the right hand. It feels good, it feels natural, organic, and right. So I kind of like this because it's a good way when you're discussing the topic with somebody, especially for somebody that is transgender like myself. Unless you are transgender, it's really hard to describe what it's like to be walking around in the wrong body, and comparing it to handedness is a good example, in my opinion. I will check in to see any comments that come in as we go, and of course at the end we'll circle back and see. Now, what happens out there to folks, including myself, is what's termed gender dysphoria. It's when you have a conflict between the person's physical or assigned gender, if you will, and the gender in which he, she, or they identify. People like myself with gender dysphoria may be uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, with a gender they were assigned, and sometimes describe it as being uncomfortable with their body or being uncomfortable with the roles of their assigned gender. I can tell you that I have been uncomfortable with my body since I first identified my body as Female. Never felt right. And we'll get into my story coming up. I also included this, even though it's not the best graphic. It was another example of what it's like to be transgender. And basically, this is what it's like. Sometimes the wrong label just gets put on the wrong product. And there's nothing wrong with the label. There's nothing wrong with the product. And there's nothing wrong with what's inside. They just don't match. A mistake has happened. So in this case, we see peas, but what's inside is carrot. At the end of the day, the part that matters is what's inside the can. No amount of denial or stubbornness will make those carrots turn into peas. Kind of a fun example. And with that, I'm going to jump into my story. Now, you might be asking why, especially if you know me, you know that I'm older. Why am I all of a sudden sharing my story now? Well, all of my life, when I discovered I was trans, I suppressed my gender identity. I didn't share this with people. And when you live a lie, it's not a good place to come from. I was very angry. I was frustrated. I felt like didn't belong. I wasn't equal to everybody. Basically, a description of gender dysphoria. I honestly feel 6 feet tall with a very buff male body because I work out 4 times a week. But when I look in the mirror, what happens? Well, I see a female body staring back at me. And of course, in my daily interactions with others, it brings me back to, quote, reality when people misgender me. I like to show this drawing from Jim Tweedy. He basically has a beagle looking in a mirror, drawing what they feel inside, which is a German Shepherd. It's called Self-Portrait, and I just love it because that's a great way to describe. If I were drawing what I felt inside, it would be that 6'2" buff male. Now, what most people see or assume they have seen since as long as I can remember, of course, I was always termed a tomboy because I acted like a boy. And then, of course, when I got older, I thought I was a lesbian because I realized I was attracted to women. And of course, a female, that's just an assumption because if you look at me, even though my gender expression is very much male, my hair, my clothing, I still have female anatomy. But the bottom line and my absolute goal with the rest of my years on this earth is to help people understand that you should never assume what you see is what is real for that person. And in my case, and thank you to this Snapchat filter, I happen to be a transgender person. I feel and identify with the male gender. So sometimes what you see is not real for that person. And if you're a business, any kind of business, especially customer facing, misgendering people is not a good idea. It'll affect your bottom line. It certainly isn't being respectful. So I'm going to give you some good ideas going forward on how to help with that. Now, when I was growing up, I always had it running through my head that something was wrong here. That was absolutely my theme, as far back as I could remember. But I had no idea what was wrong. I was born in a biological body that didn't match my gender, but at the time, there was nothing out there. There was hardly anything about sexual orientation and lesbian and gay people, let alone transgender. You know, had we known back then what we know now, they would have realized that my gender identity didn't match my physical body, but we didn't have that luxury. Needless to say, I was very uncomfortable physically and mentally, and I had gender dysphoria. Because of this, this conflict in my mind and body, I became extremely introverted, painfully shy, very unhappy, and a very angry person. I love my parents dearly. My mom, I still have her. She's 93, but they called me a miserable soul. Now imagine growing up and that's what you're hearing. Needless to say, they were absolutely right on. When you're uncomfortable, when you start realizing your body doesn't feel right, it doesn't match what you feel inside, you're miserable. So they were right. And you can see the picture. This was me and my older brother, Alan. My mom always had me in bows. And of course, I was too little. I was probably only, what, a year or two old there. I didn't even start to understand what male, boy, girl differences at that point were. So I was never comfortable in my body. I rarely talked, had zero confidence, and I had it totally made up that I was stupid. It's probably why I went on to earn 2 master's degrees, trying to dispel that stupidity that I thought was running through me. But it wasn't that at all. It really was the gender dysphoria talking. Now, in the pictures, you can see these are my 2 brothers, Alan and Normie. This haircut was the closest I got to a crew cut, which is what I really wanted. And of course, you can see the dresses my mom put me in. That's me and my best friend, Sally, bows in my hair. So all of those things being born in the physical body that I didn't relate to or identify with. And of course, my mom didn't know. She was making me into the girl that she thought gender identity was. And then to top it all off, I was given this, as you can see, pretty darn nice body, this long silky hair, and all I really wanted was a male physique and a crew cut. Keeping in mind, I still did not know that I had gender dysphoria and there was something wrong. I want you to notice too in the pictures that I show you that my hair was always covering my breasts because I was incredibly uncomfortable, needless to say, in my body. All the time, I had no idea what it was to be a transgender person or what the gender spectrum was. No clue. Nobody did. That was not talked about or referenced in any of the education that I had. So what do you think a very unhappy, good-looking, quote, girl is to do? Well, Miss Roth got betrothed. Yep, that was back in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh. I got engaged. I didn't know what else to do. I mean, this is what, quote, girls did, women did. I got engaged to a great guy, handsome dude, still pretty miserable. And again, notice that hair. That hair was always covering those breasts. Anytime I had an opportunity to feel like a dude, of course, this little moped in Mexico might have been a 1500cc Harley. Being on that, I mean, that just made me feel so good inside, matching my gender. To this day, I want to be taller, so I am either standing on my toes or standing on a rock to be taller than who I'm with, including my partner, who is taller than me. And then I call this my Michael Landon look because couldn't see my breasts, had a short haircut, looked kind of buff, and I love that picture because I thought I looked like a guy. Halloween, needless to say, is my favorite holiday, and my gender expression, of course, can be male. I can actually now live my gender identity by having my gender expression. So this was a Halloween party with my partner, Day of the Dead, so I got to be a male character. In my younger days, I always had tattoos, German Shepherd dogs, always wanted to have that physique of male. Even as a Boy Scout and a Girl Scout, and even as a nerd, you can see over the years my gender expression and my Halloween. Why I love Halloween is I get to live my gender identity. And just this past October, there I am with my partner. It was a Clue party, so I was being a dead Professor Plum, and that was Mrs. Peacock with us. So you might be wondering, how and when did I finally figure out I was a transgender person? How did I finally know what was wrong here? Well, first I became a great actor. So from the ages of 5 to 12, I pretty much tried to act like a girl, even though I didn't. I mean, I was a huge tomboy. I did everything that the boys did. I wanted to play wiffle ball. I got dirty and muddy. I hated wearing lacy and frilly stuff that my mom made me wear. I didn't want to go to ballet classes. I mean, this just was not who I was. I wanted to hang out with my brothers and their friends, but I had to pretend to be a girl. As a teenager, of course, here I am thinking, well, I guess I better start acting as a cisgender and date boys and go to the dances and be heterosexual and do all that. And then in college as a young adult, something did happen. I met a woman and I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe I'm a lesbian. And at least I felt like I was getting closer to this mystery of what is wrong here. But at age 44, keeping in mind how many years later we are, age 44, I was watching a program on Lifetime, the Lifetime channel, and the light bulb went off. The fireworks exploded, and here I finally found, watching this program about transgender people, I am a transgender person. I cannot even begin to tell you how this made me feel. After 44 years of finally learning who I was and why I felt uncomfortable in my body, in my person, all these years, well, embracing who I was very affirming, finally. Sharing it with others, friends and family, not so much. So guess what? After my friends and family told me that I was being silly, that this wasn't who I was, I went back in the closet for another 20 years. 20 more years back in the closet. But at least I knew who I was. I ended up writing my 4th book, coming out as a transgender person, Don't Call Me Ma'am, in 2017. It's available on Amazon. And don't forget, all profits from book sales go to GLBT homeless youth. Because I realized, forget Shelley, it's not about me. With the years I have left on this earth, my mission is to make a difference and make the world a better place and more accepting for folks like myself. Because it's really not about me. I'm a good educator. That was my background. I started off as a teacher, guidance counselor, and principal before I got into business. And now I'm a business person with my own business. And it's all about raising awareness through education. And the money that I get, of course, is all donated to the GLBT homeless at the nonprofit I shared with you. So the education I'm doing, helping companies create gender inclusive environments, speaking and training, consulting, all of this helps companies with their bottom line profits, because when you have a more gender inclusive policy and you know how not to misgender people, it's going to affect your bottom line. And of course, the other big headline, transgender people are at an extremely high risk to be bullied, sexually assaulted, and attempt suicide. The numbers are staggering. According to the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, the data revealed that transgender and gender nonconforming youth are 35% more likely to have attempted suicide and more likely to be bullied. That is just not acceptable. According to the National Center for Transgender Equality in the workplace, I'm not going to read you every one of these, but 44% are passed over for jobs, 23% were denied promotions, almost over a quarter fired, 3 in 4 have experienced workplace discrimination. Through my education, I help raise awareness and dollars for LGBTQ homeless youth. And if you want to learn more about what I'm doing, you can go to springboardworks.com and click diversity inclusion. Now, there are lots of changes happening out there. One of them is just this past October was the 2nd International Pronouns Day. They have a Facebook page you can find, and you can also go to their website, pronounsday.org, to learn more. During that day, of course, lots of organizations throughout the world present. Of course, I do my gender class on that day as well. How can you make a difference? Well, you can start with pronouns and trying to use gender neutral language, so since you don't assume. really good read on why the singular use of they is happening. The New York Times wrote about it. Basically, they is universal and can be purely a neutral pronoun. When people encounter it, they infer nothing about your gender. This makes singular they a perfect pronoun. It's flexible, inclusive, unobtrusive, etc. In most circumstances, it creates a perfectly coherent sentence, of which I'm going to give you some examples as we go. Now, here are all the pronouns out there and the ways to use them. And of course, you'll see they can be used as a singular pronoun. It is in the dictionary now as a singular pronoun. And you also see the other pronouns, ze and zer, are neopronouns, modern personal pronouns used by people whose gender lies outside of the male-female binary. For me, my pronouns are they, them, their. But you'll also see the use of these other pronouns as well. Here's an example, a real live example. Shelley presented to a diversity group last week on gender-neutral language. They were open and honest about the difference we can make for a transgender, gender-fluid person. Their call to action was to be aware and ask what names and pronouns people prefer. Bring Shelley to tell their story to your organization. So you can see how it's easy to replace that. It just takes practice. Mistakes will be made. Speaking of practice, I found a cool site that lets you practice your pronouns with different pronouns. Commonly used pronouns, they and them and ze and zer and v and some of the other neopronouns in there. So you can click on that link to go to that site where they'll give you sentences so you can fill them in. Now, gender neutral pronouns, Facebook, if you set up your profile on Facebook, you probably didn't notice, but go back and look at it. If you go under custom and start typing trans, you'll see all the options you can have: transgender, trans female, trans male, etc. If you start typing just G, all I did was put G, you can see all the options: gender non-conforming, gender variant, gender queer, bigender, gender, trans male, etc. So you can go in and do that. Thank you, Facebook. They even take it a step further with which pronoun do you prefer. They don't give you just wish her or wish him, wish them, which is what, of course, my pronoun profile has chosen. At the American Association of Law Libraries, they had ribbons that you could add to your name tag. My pronouns are. Vanderbilt, of course, has name tags with the pronouns actually part of the name tag. The booth that I recently worked at a conference for principals and guidance counselors, I give out bands that have your pronouns. They were very popular. Everybody wants to pick their band, either they, them, or she, her, etc. And what you can do to be an ally is pretty simple. You can add your pronouns to your LinkedIn profile and your email signature. And also just ask people, what name do you prefer? What pronouns do you prefer? Here's my LinkedIn profile, and you can see after my name, I have my pronouns. You'll also see my Outlook. I use Outlook for my email. After my name, I have my pronouns. Very easy to do and something that helps you be an ally. On my Twitter account, I also have my pronouns after my name. Now, you could have business cards made and add your pronouns to your business cards if you wanted to. A tip for you, when you introduce yourself, let them know your pronouns. Hi, my name is Shelley. My pronouns are they, them. People might look at you like you have two heads, but it gives you an opportunity to educate and be an ally. Now, the first thing you can do to be an ally, of course, you can become aware, which some of you that are watching this are learning more. I so appreciate you. Get involved, speak out, include gender diverse people in discussions, take on the work of inclusion, think about your language, and be willing to correct others. It can get really hard at times to do these things, but it's the only way the world will change. And of course, stay educated. If you join my newsletter or my group on Facebook, you will be kept informed of what's happening out there. And of course, I'd love for you to bring me into your organization to talk about gender neutral language. Again, how to find me: if you go to Shelley Roth, you'll see the join the Gender Diversity Facebook group or sign up for my newsletter to be kept aware of what's happening out there. Something I created back when my book came out is the tip card. And if you go to Shelley Roth, of course, you'll see it there. You can customize the tip card for your own. And I like to say my tagline is changing the world one pronoun at a time. The tip card is a postcard size, and I have them printed up, and I leave these when I go to restaurants as part of my tip. I also leave them when I go to the doctor's office. I leave them when I go to most retail establishments, because 9 times out of, well, I'm going to say 99 times out of 100, I will be misgendered, because people assume what they see is she and her. Can't blame them, but wouldn't it be nice if they were gender neutral and didn't make that assumption? So check out the tip card. Some policy ideas for your organization to include gender neutral language. We're going to skip this right now because I just looked at the clock, but think about if your organization has policies. Do you have them? Are you considering them? I'd love to help you with that. Some ideas for front offices. Now, again, these were based on medical, but you can apply them really to anything. Instead of using terms like sir and ma'am that we're all taught to be polite and use those terms, be neutral. How may I help you today? When talking to coworkers and patients, avoid pronouns and other gender terms. Instead of she is in the waiting room, your patient is in the waiting room. Instead of he is here for his appointment, they are here for their appointment. Politely ask what name and pronouns are preferred, or how would you like to be addressed? And if you make a mistake, don't make a big deal about it. Apologize for using the wrong pronouns and just move on. Some other gender neutral language: you want to think about a protocol for noting preferred names and pronouns when you address mail, leave messages, bring somebody in to take information from them. Have clear lines of referral for your questions, and appoint a staff person responsible for providing guidance and setting procedures. And again, ongoing education and retraining. Don't make assumptions. Ask open-ended questions. Try and stay gender neutral. That way you won't offend somebody and it's respectful. So just some examples for you there. Just please don't make assumptions. And of course, as Bob Dylan sings and sang, the times they are a-changin'. So most recently in September of this year, the Communications Network, the Denver branch, had a conference called Beyond Binary. The gender identity issue is more than just a trend. It's a societal shift. This comes right from their conference, one that's particularly being shaped by millennials and Gen Z. While the impact's already beginning to be felt in retail and education, it's increasingly impactful in other sectors like healthcare and housing. Think of it this way: if you are ever targeting your communications and outreach and products and services at men, women, or young people, this issue is likely to impact your work and bottom line. There's a variety of factors driving this change, of course. According to the Pew Research Center, they found that Gen Zers are moving toward adulthood with liberal attitudes and an openness to emerging trends such as gay marriage and gender identity. According to the Pew Research report, 35% of Gen Zers say they know someone who prefers others refer to them with gender-neutral pronouns. 35% of Gen Zers, 60% of Gen Zers say forms or online profiles that ask about gender should include options other than male and female. So the times, they are definitely a changing. We talked about Barbie and Ken earlier. Well, guess what, guys? September 25th, 2019, this year, Mattel introduced gender inclusive dolls to encourage more creative play for boys, girls, and anyone identifying as both, neither, or in between. The Creatable World, you can read more at that link. Launch it, keep labels out, invite everyone in by giving children the freedom to customize their characters. The dolls sell for $30. They consist of a doll with no gender identifying features and 2 hairstyle options, long or short, as well as a variety of outfits and accessories. So very interesting. The times are changing. And of course, Facebook, we talked about, offers more than 50 gender identities when you fill out your profile. And as we said, the maker of Barbie introduced this new line of gender neutral dolls. So there is definitely something significant happening out there. In the news, Merriam-Webster adds they as a singular non-binary pronoun. The city of Berkeley this fall, always leading the way with progressive laws, just last month added that they will remove all gendered words from the city code. That means personal pronouns like he and she are going to be they and them. But it doesn't stop there. Manholes are becoming maintenance holes, firemen or firefighters, etc. In Fort Bend County here in Texas, if you're in Houston, Fort Bend County is right south of us, one of the most diverse, largest counties in the nation, adds protections for LGBTQ workers, including sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Yay. Air Canada drops ladies and gentlemen's greetings on planes for gender neutral welcome. So no more ladies and gentlemen. It's just they want everybody to feel welcome. Standard introduction to address customers, everybody, in an effort to be more inclusive. New York, January of this year, add to a certificate of birth, if someone doesn't want to assign male, female, again, gender, there's an X box. You can read the article. Philly non-binary teachers embrace the non-binary honorific. MX added. I got a letter just this past May from my insurance company. I had filed a claim. I couldn't believe it. There it was, MX Shelley Roth. I was just so happy and so excited that I wasn't misgendered. United University of Texas Health Center, you can see they're trying. They have sex, male, female, transgender on their form at the UT Med Center. United Airlines, I went to check in. I nearly almost wanted to scream and shout my excitement. Finally, I didn't have to pick male or female, which was always causes me gender dysphoria. I could click undisclosed or unspecified. Thank you, United. Some other states offering a non-binary option, of course, New York Times article on driver's license option. Hawaii next year in July is going to start offering non-binary option on driver's license. Oregon back in 2017 recognized the third gender and granted non-binary status, and the District of Columbia has a gender-neutral choice on driver's license and ID cards. September last year, California recognized the third gender, and the state, California changed one of their laws to support that Gender Recognition Act. Even Coca-Cola in the Super Bowl, if you watch the Super Bowl in 2018, you might have noticed that there was references to gender neutral pronouns in the presentation. You can watch the video. And when that happened, Twitter went crazy that Coca-Cola were recognizing a third gender. Miss Manners had a question back in January of last year. You can click on that and read all the comments about how to address people with gender neutral pronouns. And then if you want to keep up on all the news like I just shared with you, I always keep abreast of what is happening in the news. I share that in my gender diversity Facebook group. I also share it in my newsletter. So if you go to Shelley Roth, you can click on either of those. Bring me into your company. I would love nothing better than to present gender neutral language, why creating gender neutral language is so important to an inclusive environment, as well as tell my story. Gender diversity inclusion consulting, I can help companies with their policies and intake forms. Keep in mind that all proceeds go to the Association for Family and Community Integrity. And remember, everybody, hashtag love is love. Treat others as you want to be treated. We're all making our way as souls on the earth. Love thy neighbor, and please do not ask questions you wouldn't want asked of you. Don't assume what you see is what is real for that person. We know the old assume, right? Check out ShelleyRoth.com if you want to shoot me an email. Please do. Happy to talk to you on the phone. I get calls from grandparents, parents that are struggling. How do they deal with their child? I am happy to just chat with you, talk to you, provide resources for you. And if you want to know what's coming up, just go to the events tab. Next year, we'll have LinkedIn here in Houston, Lunch and Learn. Remember, I do still do social media training, gender non-binary webinar. I do those once a month, about every 6 weeks or so, and the Power of Email Marketing webinar. All right, we are going to take your questions. I'm going to open up the screen, open up the chat for any questions. We have about 3 minutes to go. I will be sending this out to everybody that is registered. Whether you're here or not, you will get a copy to the slides as well as a copy of the recorded session. I'm going to go ahead and wait a couple more minutes, see if we have any questions coming in. And again, the easiest way to find me or get a hold of me is to shoot me an email, sroth@shelleyroth.com. This is my business line where you can leave a message if you would like. Happy to come to your organization and present this information. All right, it doesn't look like we have any questions. So with that, I say have a great rest of your day, and don't forget, I'm here for you if you need me. Reach out, and hope to meet you virtually online or at a future event at your company or organization. Thanks for being here.